So I think it's impossible to avoid talking about religion, or at least we should situate our discussion of religion in the context of developmental psychology.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean that our relationship as children to our parents is in some ways in this incarnation our first encounter with gods, and parents have that status as the primary relata of our childhood, the primary relationships of our childhood.
Yeah.
And so, depending on how our parents operate, we come out of childhood with a very different relationship to the divine.
Yeah.
But we all have to, the goal would be to develop into an individual capable of relating to God directly, rather than just through one's parents. If you're still looking to your parents to be gods, if you're still blaming your parents for who you are, as if, they created you, but when do you become a self-created individual? Eventually you have to say, it's not my parents' fault. I am who I am because I have will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times for adults, when they relate to the idea of God, belief in God, relationship with God, atheism versus theism and all the different forms of theism, agnosticism, I think these are somehow, maybe a more like a Buddhist understanding of the divine ground. Like, these are all different ways of resolving the crisis of childhood and trying to become sovereign and separate from one's parents. Does this resonate at all? Anything that I'm saying?
Well, I don't know. It almost sounds like a psychoanalytic idea. You think they're all just responses to that?
Well, I think as we age, ideally we would come to see it as more than just a psychoanalytic thing. I'm just offering it's a correspondence theory that God relates to the world through this process of human development.
Mm-hmm.
And so each of us comes to relate or not to God in a variety of ways based on how we resolve the struggle of human development.
Yeah.
Which is like individuation from one's parents into a society to make a name for yourself rather than just sort of being given it by your parents.
Yeah, that's how it is, like in
Western society.
Yeah, but there are, I guess, people's, and historically, sometimes there are examples of, I guess you would call them kinship structures or systems of relationship among peoples where it wasn't known who the father was.
Right. So they have different conceptions of the divine as a result.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Also, the child, may grow up with not like this idea that there's two parents, but to, I guess, relating to all of the individuals that are part of their group.
There are many, in most of the, let's say, polytheistic traditions and indigenous cosmogonies, there's always a lot of different
characters
going on. It's not just the father.
Yeah.
Or just the father and maybe the mother's mentioned once in a while, but it's like all these different relatives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's more plural.
So I guess that's why I was like...
everything I was saying was very Eurocentric. It's, this is why Freud and the whole psychoanalytic tradition is kind of like taking the Oedipal complex and cosmologizing it.
Well, it also kind of like chains the whole rest of life to childhood,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and
Yeah.
of course, like, it's never not there. It's a part of who we are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the babe in the manger, born in the manger, is a central
Totally.
part of Christianity,
But, yeah, just that image, you know, it's very archetypal. And, you know, Rome has the puer eternus.
Right.
Eternal child.
But, you know, one way or another, whether it's the more Western Oedipal type of family structure, or whether it's a more community-oriented form of, you know, child rearing, where you don't even know who the father is necessarily, or maybe you do know, but there's like a whole family of kin relations beyond just the blood relations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a different conception of God must arise in that social context.
Yeah.
But given that we are, you know, Europeans.
I was also gonna say, I was thinking of the Greeks and how, like, there are these different generations of gods, and they're almost like, you could just almost think about it as like this ecology that's flowing down, or, you know, flowing into form.
Mm-hmm.
Of different kinds of beings.
Yeah.
And they all have, like, different relationships with each other, and like in a non-heteronormative way.
Yeah. Well, I
and
mean,
also with beings of different, like, levels as well, like, you know, gods relating to humans, or demigods, or like nymphs or nereids. Anyway. Yeah.
So maybe, even though both of us are people of European inheritance, at this point in planetary history, it's time to transcend those local identities, would you say, so that we can sort of grow towards God in a way that's not limited by any particular social structure or psychological structure.
So wait, what are you asking?
Is it time to stop psychoanalyzing socialization of religion? Or what's a better word for that? Sociological reductionism of religion. Should we just...
No. I don't think we should stop that, but I think it needs to be integrated into a larger frame of reference.
Okay, so we have to keep doing that, but that's not enough either, right?
No.
We still need to do theology.
I think so.
As an independent science, right? That's not limited by the methods of sociology or psychoanalysis or biology or anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess you could call it like the spirit as well. It's related to the spirit.
Not just the soul and the body.
Well, those are what I think we're already talking about, but they're all related. So it kind of it reframes how to see those as well, I think.
Yeah. So the soul becomes embodied. A mother gives birth to a child. The soul becomes embodied. And then that whole process is spiritual. But what happens to the child? What happens to the child's relationship to spirit during and after the birth process?
Oh, well, I've actually read some how should I put it, descriptions of that, you know. Of course, they are from a certain perspective, but it's described, it was actually talking about, like, the way to, I guess, approach parenting is as if there's this being that you don't own, that is not just you. you are bringing it into being. You're a part of that. And that they are, especially when they're first born, still very, like, they are of the spirit world. And that's how they inhabit the world in a physical body, so they absorb everything because they are not differentiated from their environment or their caregivers. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of live with that in mind.
Yeah.
And because there's a gradual, differentiation, and, there's a potential to kind of, like, I guess, midwife it and, like, help it to, like, maintain some kind of residue of that. Or, there are, unfortunately, like, traumatic upbringings that just kind of close people off from it.
Mm-hmm. So the parent has to allow the child to, as much as possible, not forget their spiritual origins.
Yeah, which, in a way, is to treat the child, like, as an individual. As another, another spiritual being, like, that is very wise,
So ideally, the parents would be awake to their own spiritual origins, and then
exactly.
But there's this moment in the child where consciousness flickers on, and then even if the parents have created the condition, the child has to make the free decision to continue to pursue that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They have their own path.
I think parents have to. Who am I to talk? But it seems like good parents are the ones who are able to let their kids try that out, instead of trying to enforce a particular path that they think is going to help them realize their I. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's probably, if a parent's doing that, an indication that they haven't really individuated. They're not willing to. They're owning the child, like you said.
Yeah, they're passing on their own issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so this person was describing that, wow, that makes like raising children sound like really intimidating. And she was like, well, as long as you are making an effort, they'll know that. And I found that really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing to say, that they will, like, perceive your intention to try to, like, overcome yourself, basically. Like, or overcome what you have taken on as baggage.
Well, another way to say that is they know when you're paying attention to them.
Yeah.
In other words, like, they can feel your love.
Mm-hmm.
Attention is love. Like, you're giving your time, your energy, your concern, your care to them, and they feel that. Whereas if you're distracted, if you don't pay attention, they're going to feel that too and be like, oh, I am not loved. That fucks everybody up.
I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people who grow up, like, in, like, dysfunctional formative experience don't, like, it's not obvious to them until later, because we don't really, like, our thinking is kind of, it's conditioned by materialism. So I just don't think most people think about the fact that the way that the parents are with the child, even if they, by appearances, seem like, everything was fine, but it's like we're not taught to know that the inside of our experience is, it's all united. We're not aware of I guess you could say, like, the soul space that's being shared. And but it's all, like, unconscious within us now, and until we raise it into consciousness by thinking in these sorts of ways, and it opens up. Oh
yeah, I mean, that would be unless a parent is aware of that spiritual fact, that when you turn back upon yourself to search for a self, it's true, as the Buddhists say, and as David Hume said, you don't really find anything solid. You find, in fact, I think, curious what you think, but I think when you really turn back in upon yourself and you go as deep as you can, what you find are all the faces of the soul realm looking back at you. you don't find, you're still invisible to yourself. You see others looking back at you, or you see other features of yourself, you could say.
Yeah.
And so it's the relationship that's primary. Like, the self is composed of, or the soul, let's say, is composed of love. You know, and if parents can connect with the child through that attention field and tap into that soul love, you know, then the child from their spiritual place is going to know the parent cares. But if parents are not in touch with that realm, if they don't know that they're made of love because their parents never taught them that.
Yeah, they're all like getting triggered probably, you know. And also, like, you know, we live in such a precarious financially, economically society that people are just already anxious about having a child, raising a child.
Yeah.
And now, especially, gosh, just, man.
Two guys who have never been parents theologizing about parenting. This is interesting.
I think we're also just, I don't know, I'm just reflecting on the state of parenting today.
Well, I mean, we all know a lot about it because we were kids once, at least, even if we haven't had our own kids yet.
Yeah, well, and just observation of friends and...
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Just having had the privilege of being around young people, you know, over the last several years, they are gods. You know, like, they relate to the world in an entirely different way. Like, they're not separate from it at all, like you're saying. And unless you can go there with them, you're gonna stunt their development. You're gonna harm them.
Yeah.
So there is a spirituality to, I mean, how could there not be to, you know, the reproduction of the human species? And I feel like theology is a kind of self-parenting almost, or like auto-parenting. And like the way that you're able to make meaning independently of your parents, but also independently of, you know, your psychological complexes, and independent of your social and historical, not independent like separated from, but just not determined by all of these conditioning factors. And you're at least striving to self-parent, to like take care of yourself in relation, by being taken care of by something divine that you've tapped into.
Yeah, I think it actually, I would describe it as like, it transcends parenting. It's like what good parents point to, if that makes sense. It's just like the word good.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like something even more incomprehensible. It's like wordless.
It is, and yet the most powerful, I mean, let's say one of the most powerful images of this divine transcendence in the biblical tradition is this virgin birth and this divine death, like the death of God and the birth of God in human form. And so it is really like centering that mystery, which is an earthly mystery.
Yeah, it's very earthly. It is, I mean, like, the more that I've turned, I guess, back towards it, I don't know, especially after having been raised in the 21st century, like,
In a Baptist town.
It seems like a miracle. Like, it just is kind of, I don't know, obviously it's a miracle, but it's almost like a it's like a kind of more fresh, I guess, way of experiencing it than I remember as a kid, because you know, I didn't immediately start thinking, well, that sounds impossible. You know.
Well, it's kind of like a hyper story, or it's like hyper history. So
yeah, exactly. That's exactly how to put it. It's like, it's almost like history on LSD. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, I understand everything.
Yeah. So if was Jesus a historical person? It's like, well, I mean, maybe, but that's not the right question to be asking.
Yeah, it's like it's a different kind of logic.
And that's the thing, like, we have these books, these religions based on books, and the important thing is, like, how do you read the book?
Mm-hmm.
How do you enact the truth that it contains? Because if you're going to read it as, like, a rule book or as a literal record, then you're going to miss the spiritual essence that it's trying to convey and like preserve, and which it might be inevitable, but there are ways of reading it that are really potent. They like trigger mutations in your consciousness just because of the symbolic force and like poetic power of the narratives, which are they're like hyper historical, and so they like resonate with each time. Even 2,000 years people have been reading these books, and they continue to resonate in new ways in each historical period.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that's really exciting about the 20th and at least the 20th and 21st century is the kind of feminist engagement with it, like by, people like Catherine Keller.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reading her book on the Book of Revelation, Jonathan Patmos's Book of Revelation, which was just a letter to the Christian communities around the Mediterranean, and she's trying to decode it and comparing it to some of the American evangelical Trumpian attempts to decode it. And it's like, God, it's absurd, but it's so important to work with these symbols because
they are animating,
they're making history,
the collective consciousness.
Yep.
Like I was hearing on the news that there may be potential domestic violence
because of the vaccines.
Yeah. That there's been, I guess,
threats.
Yeah, or not. I don't know. Not threat, but I guess a briefing or.
Well, that's what I've been saying.
That's what I have been anticipating as well.
Speaking of self-parenting, the whole question of vaccines for kids was already a hot topic, and now, adults are having to be persuaded, but persuasion wasn't working, and now there's state force coming down. I've been saying I don't think
the way that
we should do that, but
the messaging, as they say, from the U.S. government, from what's his name, Fauci, has been very not very good parent.
Well, they've been patronizing.
Yeah,
talking down to people.
Yeah, that's how they're acting.
Telling us what they think we need to hear to do what they want us to do, instead of just telling us what's happening.
Not treating people like individuals who are smart enough to assess things and to pool their, to talk to other people and not just decide. Yeah, I was like, that's gonna be. I don't want to project violence, but that's what I was. That might be like a kind of catalyst.
It's coming to this standoff.
Conflict.
I mean, it's a standoff, right? Because there's 25% of the people in the country that don't want to get vaccinated and won't. They're refusing, and the government is inching towards requiring it to participate in public life, and if the people resist, the state will use violence to make them conform.
Yeah, that's not good.
I don't think it's good either. It's just...
I would never want...
pushing us towards violence. A mandate pushes us towards violence, and given the facts right now that even vaccinated people can spread it, so we know more about how much less vaccinated people are spreading it, I don't think we should be mandating it. It's just provoking violence.
Yeah, and there's already a lot of resentment.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just like... And this also, unfortunately, I think for some of these more like intense conspiracy theorists communities, like this, what's happening, like, it's probably like reinforcing their narratives like really strongly.
Yeah.
Almost like proof, or, you know.
We're all captured by the apocalypse narrative, and we're just, whether it's prophecy or self-fulfilling prophecy, it's like we're just converging on it collectively because not enough people are individuated. I think Jung was really onto it when he talked about the importance of individuals self-parenting well enough to individuate, that was the only way to avert collective catastrophe.
You want to hear an interesting, I guess, parallel to that?
Yeah.
In this lecture I was listening to of Steiner, he said that he was talking about tragedy and in relation to freedom, and so he was kind of typifying like Greek tragedy, you know, which presents narratives of figures that are like bound to their fate, and it's tragic, especially because what happens often is terrible, and but they have like no control. And he was describing that as being, that's the characterizes inspiration, which is that more, as he describes, like atomistic clairvoyance, like original participation. You know, it's like, I guess as he describes it, precedes the possibility for freedom and individuation. And so then one is no longer, I guess, inspired like from within, but then ends up being kind of turned outward and like swept up by the world karma. Not to say that there's not a relationship between the individual's, you know, I guess karmic stream and the, obviously, what the world events, but like, I guess instead of freedom, it's like the potential for being totally entrained on the external world. And so you're just reacting, basically.
Does this make sense? That to say that humans learn to be individuals always in the context of societies, including their parents, first of all, and then society at large. Whereas spirit learns in the context of individuality, of an individual human life. So that to the extent that humans, you know, spiritualize their lives, they individuate. And there's something individual about that, because it is an act of freedom, as you're saying.
Yeah.
But
it's kind of like becoming God.
That's looking at it from the perspective of spirit, but from the perspective of a human individual, you have your whole society to deal with, your historical context.
Yeah. That's,
you know,
yeah,
your embodiment.
Like, Jung describing the tension between individuation and the collective.
Right.
The collective function is individuation.
Yeah, so it's a titanic struggle because, I mean, especially nowadays, there's just, I feel like we're right in the middle of an explosion that looks kind of, maybe 10 years ago it was kind of more slow motion, but now it's accelerating.
Yeah.
But it's just going to keep accelerating for centuries. And
Yep.
get orders of magnitude more intense. And that's going to really shake out a lot of it's going to pop a lot of egos. I don't know who first came up with that phrase, but I think it's apt for what happens now with whatever. It could be mass shooters, it could be just
Mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, just that's what's going on right now. I mean,
and so the pressure is increasing, and we're being pushed in a new direction collectively, and that's pressuring individuals. And spirituality is still there in the background, still mostly playing its role. And it's hard to know, just as a finite person in the midst of history, how to participate in that in a karmically neutral or karmically redemptive way.
Yeah, redemptive. I like that word.
I guess that's why, religion and theology are important, because they allow you to ask that question, how do I act in a redemptive way?
Yeah.
In relationship to the world. And that requires not blaming other people for your problems, first of all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it comes, I think, a sense of responsibility for oneself and the world.
Mm-hmm. Why is that so hard?
Because, I guess, our situation, the way our lives, I guess, have been structured, don't, support us. It's almost like we have antisocial living conditions.
Yeah.
And it keeps us all moving along, surviving without always becoming conspirators.
Yeah.
Without breathing together.
These antisocial living conditions that lead us to develop antisocial selves.
We're defensive and paranoid and
envious and
greedy. And
so our ego is just totally like a social ego. It's just totally obsessed with other people's opinions.
Neo-Darwinism.
And in a sort of either a shame spiral or
Social Darwinism,
a shame spiral, or a ecstatic, megalomania.
Yeah.
And instead of being, centered in what Jung called the self, or some kind of Christ consciousness, or Buddha mind, or Krishna awareness, whatever you want to call it. I think we need to be pluralistic about it, don't you?
Oh, yeah. That's what I was going to say earlier, that, it's just, I guess, beautiful, the array of images that mediate this kind of immanent transcendence.
Mm-hmm. I think the sacred marriage has been in the background. The sacred marriage archetype.
Yeah.
Has been in the background of everything we've been saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to see that in its cosmic context.
Yeah.
To avoid idolatry,
Yeah. And queer it. Because then, then it's not it's no longer just an artifact of Western
kings
culture.
and queens. Yeah, or any culture.
Or, any one culture.
Mm-hmm.